It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. And we are on the line this morning with Rollo Romig, who is the author of a book called I Am on the Hit List, A Journalist's Murder and the Rise of Autocracy in India. And it's a fascinating read, and it's a downright scary read when you get right down to it. Our visit this morning presented by Marcus & Mack, voted best law firm, best personal injury lawyer 3 years in a row in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online at marcusandmack.com. Rollo is in New York City as we talk to him, but you were actually more than once in India to do your research for this book, correct?
Oh, yeah. I had to spend a lot of time in India. Traveling around, talking to lots of different people over several years. Yeah.
And you introduced to us a fascinating lady whose life was taken, and the book is called I Am on the Hit List, and she used to joke about it, but she actually was on the hit list. So introduce to us Gauri Lankesh Patrike. What a story about her and about her death.
Yeah, so Gauri Lankesh was a fascinating person, and this is part of why, I was able to devote an entire book to her. It started as a magazine article, and I just did not even feel close to done with her and her story after that. She's a very complicated person. She had a long career as a journalist with many different phases, and by the end of her life, she was a really notably outspoken journalist. And it was at the same time as journalism has become a lot more under threat in India. Under threat in a lot of different ways, but including journalists just get mercilessly trolled, including there's a government operation actually to troll government critics online. It's actually run out of a government office. And women journalists come in for particularly brutal trolling. So she knew that she was under threat. She was getting death threats all the time. And yeah, like you said, she would joke, I am on the hit list, meaning like the list of people who are slated for assassination, because unfortunately, journalists being murdered in India is not an uncommon experience. And yeah, it turned out she was right. She was literally on a list that this group had, that they were working their way down, of writers that they were assassinating. She was the fourth person killed in this pattern of murders.
Part of her story is really the region in which she was based, Karnataka. It was a really, really rich writing environment.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because she lived in one of India's biggest cities. It's the capital of Karnataka, Bangalore, and the city most Americans will have heard of. Huge mega city, but I think it was interesting that it does have these kind of quiet pockets that are a lot sleepier, and she lived in one of those areas, and that's where she was killed, on her doorstep in this neighborhood, kind of on the outskirts of the city. But yeah, it was really important for me to make the place a real character in the book, partly because I've been reporting for years out of India with a focus on South India, because it's, to me, just this really exciting, very different part of the country. We in the U.S., when we hear about India, we're usually hearing about North India specifically, the Taj Mahal, the Ganges, New Delhi. But it's an incredibly diverse country with different languages in every region, just different. Every part of culture is different wherever you go. And I really fell in love with South India. I love Bangalore. So partly this book serves as sort of just my tribute to this part of the world that I think is really special. It should be better known.
So Gauri is the daughter of a very prominent journalist and poet. When he passes away, she ends up founding her own little publication, and she's got a very acerbic writing style that played into some of the criticisms and the threats against her.
That's right. So, at a time when a lot of Indian journalists were softening their critiques, in response to this really strong suppression. And like I said, there are a lot of different techniques that the government and other players have used against journalists. Trolling is just the beginning of it. There's also, defamation lawsuits just for doing regular journalism. So she was constantly tied up in court because she had many different defamation lawsuits against her all the time. And it's in the Indian justice system, it's really easy to waste people's time with frivolous cases. She actually was found guilty in a case not long before she was killed, sentenced to jail time for defamation, and she was out, awaiting appeal. But also, the government does tax raids on newsrooms who are critical of them, and sometimes they charge journalists with terrorism just for doing regular journalism. I mean, even the novelist Arundhati Roy, who's one of the most internationally famous Indian novelists, she's got a terrorism case against her for something she said in a speech over 10 years ago. And no one seriously believes that she's guilty of terrorism, but it's just a way of trying to keep people in line. But, even with all this going on, she became more and more outspoken. It was something that worried a lot of her friends because they knew that she was kind of making herself a target in a way.
I'm interested in the aftermath of the shooting because there was a natural inclination to blame it on the government. It's a Hindu-controlled government, and they have very, very sketchy and disreputable ways that they do things, and everybody assumes that it was the government hit squad that got her. But you found through that it was a little bit different than that.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting to me how you dug this information up.
So the government of India right now, it's this right-wing ultranationalist political party that's in charge, called the BJP. The Prime Minister is Narendra Modi, and he's very ideologically committed to this right-wing ultranationalist vision. It's often described as Hindutva, this vision. It's pretty distinct from Hinduism, the religion itself, which is one of the world's great religions and one of the great wisdom traditions. Hindutva is this very specific kind of political project with the objective of trying to turn India into an explicitly Hindu country and make everyone else second-class citizens. India's got huge minorities of all different kinds. In fact, there's over 100 million Muslims in India. It's actually the largest minority population of any kind in the world. And a big part of their project has been to segregate Hindus and Muslims and to turn Muslims into second-class citizens in many ways. And Gauri was really fighting against that. And some of her friends and colleagues worried that this kind of came directly, maybe if not from the government, but from this big network of right-wing organizations that the government belongs to. And it turned out to be, the trial is still ongoing, but the police that investigated the case found that nearly all of the men involved, they arrested 17 men, actually, for collectively conspiring to murder Gauri, and that they were all associated in one way or another with this tiny right-wing fringe group called Sanatan Sanstha. And Sanatan Sanstha is not, directly affiliated with the government, but they're ideologically completely in sync with what the government wants. And they're one of these groups, and you see this with these kind of right-wing nationalist movements around the world, that there are these networks of organizations. Some of them are official, and some of them are these fringe groups that are on the side, and they serve a very important role because they kind of push the envelope on what's acceptable to say and what's acceptable to do. And so when the government, when official organizations find it useful, they embrace them. If the wind is blowing the other direction, then they kind of keep them at arm's length. But they're really useful for kind of making the message and the agenda more and more radical over time. And so this was this group that, has been pretty strongly associated with this series of 4 murders. Although, like I said, the trial is still ongoing. It's been going on for 3 years, actually, with no end in sight.
The government sort of emboldened this group to do what they did, and then the government maybe sort of winked at it a little bit?
That's the sense. There's a lot of this winking going on with political violence in India over the past 10 years. In the early years of the Modi administration, there was a horrible series of lynchings of Muslim men who were accused of trafficking in beef. In nearly all cases, these allegations were completely made up. And the government, had this disturbing tendency to sort of, well, mostly just to not acknowledge it at all, even though it was this national crisis of this series of lynchings, but often just to, kind of wink at it and even to imply a certain approval, and certainly not to do anything about it.
It's a wonderful, wonderful read. The research that goes into it is fascinating, and what you had to do to make this book happen. I sort of get the feeling that if it were me and I were going back to India and people knew what I was writing about, that I might be looking over my shoulder a little bit. Did you ever get that sense?
Well, you have to wonder because they are paying attention, to be sure, of all criticism. And trying to stamp it out. But what I've really learned is, it's actually easy for me to come in as an outsider and do the work that I do, and I'm under very little personal threat. I've got the benefit and the protection of being an outsider, an American citizen. The people who are really doing the brave work are hundreds of Indian journalists who've persisted in being brave and outspoken, even under these really daunting and frightening circumstances. And it's really, my book is really built on their work. And I couldn't have done it without all the hundreds of Indian journalists whose work I relied on line by line in my own book. And so, in a way, I really see my book as a way to give a platform to what they're saying and spread the word about the amazing work that they're doing.
Well, here in Indiana, PA, we have a very large contingent of Indian population, thanks to our hospital and our university, and I'm sure that they are going to be very interested in this, but I'm certain as well that lots of folks will want to know about this wonderful book. I Am on the Hit List, A Journalist's Murder and the Rise of Autocracy in Indiana. Rollo Romig has been our guest here this morning. It's an imprint of Penguin Random House. Rollo, thank you so much for the visit today and for the book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Have a great day today.